Recording.
Did you broadcast?
Oh yeah, I'll do it now. Everybody ready?
Okay. And we'll wait a second because people will have to come in.
Okay, it's on.
All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Monica Wedlock Kilpatrick, and I serve as the Director of Connect Ministries for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. As we get started, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website at nbacares.org/mental-health. This webinar continues our 2018 series of webinars and educational trainings offered by the National Benevolent Association's Mental Health Initiative. And today's topic is building a congregation-based mental health ministry. With so much great information and energy being shared to inform and bring awareness to mental health issues in the church, congregations are taking seriously what it means to become a welcoming place for all. As the church, faith-filled disciples are desiring to build mental health ministries in their local congregations. However, mental health and wellness is a broad, multi-layered, and complex issue to address in the church. Often, passionate people are left feeling overwhelmed and unclear of how to pull it off. So today, we will hear from disciples who are building or expanding congregation-based mental health ministries as they share the practical realities of starting such a ministry, their discernment process, and what's next on the journey. This webinar can be used, and we hope it will be used as a tool for discussion and a call to action in congregations, regions, and even the general church. For today's webinar, there is much information we want to cover, so the presentation portion may go up to the end of the hour. If necessary, the presenters have graciously agreed to remain on the webinar for additional 15 minutes to answer questions. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions that emerge, we will welcome you to use the Q&A feature by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions. Please include your email address so that if we are unable to get to your question, we can follow up with you directly after the webinar is over. And to request technical assistance, you may also use the Q&A feature. If you're participating by phone, you may email me at mkilpatrick@nbacares.org. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website in the coming week. To begin, let me introduce our speakers. The Reverend Chris Furr has served as the pastor of Covenant Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Cary, North Carolina. He's a native of Wilmington, North Carolina, and a 2002 graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in Religious Studies, and a 2005 graduate of Duke University Divinity School. He's previously served churches in Brentwood, England, and Alexandria, Virginia, and he lives in Cary with his wife, Katie, and their 2 sons. Chris also served on the research and design team for our mental health initiative, and so we thank him for his service there. Joining Tom Jones, who taught elementary special education in Midland, Texas for 25 years. And after discovering the lack of support for families who care for children with special needs, he worked with First Christian Church Midland to start SHARE, a respite care ministry for families who care for children with special needs. After seeing another need, SHARE added parent and sibling support services. Initially, Tom led SHARE as a part-time executive director while continuing to teach. But then in 2011, he retired from teaching and worked full-time as SHARE's executive director, overseeing SHARE's growth at locations in Midland and Odessa, Texas. Thank you, Tom, for being with us. And Linda Manns, who's the firstborn of 4 children to parents that immigrated from Barbados, West Indies, and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. With an associate's, bachelor's, and master's degree in nursing, Linda has served over 47 years in the nursing field, and she retired from the Veterans Administration Medical Center in Salem, Virginia in April 2010. As the community health nurse, she served there for 32 years. She's a member of the Loudon Avenue Christian Church in Roanoke, Virginia, and shares her gifts as the community health faith nurse, a position that she started at the church as a volunteer in 1989. She's the church moderator and also serves as deacon. In May 2013, Linda was nominated and received the recognition from the Virginia Community Healthcare Association as Volunteer of the Year. And the following excerpt was taken from the nomination write-up. As one of the founding members of our community health center, Linda has been a steadfast and passionate advocate for New Horizons Healthcare and for our mission to serve the Roanoke community. She is sensitive to the needs of our staff and wants to ensure that they enjoy their work environment. Most of the activities she's involved in occur very quietly and without fanfare or attention. That Linda prefers to lead from behind the scenes and shuns the spotlight. Sometimes we wonder how someone can remain so committed to our cause for so long, and we realize that her motivation is from the most sincere need to serve others. Thank you, Linda, for also being with us. And we have Angela Whitenhill, who serves, of course, as the MBA mental health manager. She is an innovative family and children's therapist, as well as a licensed minister with experience in the mental health field and higher education, with proven success in interdisciplinary program development, bridge building, and organizational leadership. As a licensed clinical social worker, Angela specializes in trauma, suicide, depression, identity issues, and spirituality integrated psychotherapy. She formerly served as a chaplain and therapist at the Tennyson Center for Children, an MBA Health and Social Service Ministry partner, and one of the Rocky Mountain region's leading residential treatment centers. She has led and facilitated multiple training workshops in therapeutic intervention and cultural competence within the social work field. Angela earned a Master's of Social Work degree from the University of Denver and a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary in New York City. She's also earned a certificate in marriage and family therapy from the Denver Family Institute, where she served as a psychotherapist in the Institute's community clinic. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to our panelists, led by Angela.
Amen. Thank you, Monica. And thank you for everyone joining us today. We're going to jump right in and think about what are some of the initial questions of thought or topics to brainstorm when considering building a congregational-based mental health ministry. And so we'll move to our next slide there. Let's see. With that said, here are some questions that we have found through this work that really help for churches to think through, for pastors to think through, beginning with what does my congregation believe about mental health? This is a topic that we typically jump over. Everybody really excited to do mental health work, but really sitting with our lay leaders and our congregation to figure out, okay, what does mental health mean? Where does it come from? Knowing what our theological understanding is and what we believe about mental health is going to be super important before we welcome those in who might have mental health challenges, because it's going to come out in how we serve them. And so some things that may come up in that conversation would be ideas of stigma that come around that. Do you know in your congregation, is there still shame around voicing if you have something? Is there stigma related to maybe a theological belief around having mental illness or mental challenges? In fact, we have a whole webinar around breaking stigma that talk through some really awesome spiritual and theological ways to understand it, if that's something where your church is starting. Keep going down, thinking through how much education that you might need to start off with your leaders around what mental health is before we start. Who is the ministry for? So this is something I encourage pastors and congregations to do, is really think about, is this something internally we want to focus on in terms of educating or thinking through our congregation and having it services and supports for our congregation? Or is it something we want to do in the community? You can do both. but I think it's important to think through where to start, right? Also, population and demographics. So you might be thinking about doing something around depression, but you might think, really, if I'm honest with myself, I want to focus on depression in our elderly population, or depression post a certain age of development, or depression for children who've been adopted, or these elements of who is your population. You can have a very vague population, but it's important that the team thinks through, at the end of the day, where is their really heart lying, and is there a population you're thinking of? With that said, what areas of mental health do you want to focus on? And so usually what happens is we say, let's do mental health, and it's a big, broad field. So you might think of some specific mental health challenges that are close to your heart, maybe something personally that your congregation is experiencing. Has there something happened in the congregation? Or is there a population in the community that is always relating to the congregation or in need of some sort of support and help from the congregation that you might think through? A lot of times, if our congregations want to do general mental health, a great way to start is through education. And so one question to think through is, what might our structure or protocols be? Do we have people in place? Are we just going to do education and information? Are we actually going to have a counseling center? Are we going to go into the community and do support services? What do we have our structure and what do we have set up already in our congregations to be able to carry out what we want to do? One thing that I encourage our clergy and congregations to think through is, what are some potential issues that might come up? Maybe there's transportation issues, or you might need a building, or if you're meeting outside, you might get weather. But just spending some time thinking through, are there any kind of issues that come up, or strategizing about needs that may come up over time once you start the ministry? And with that said, one of the really important questions to ask your group is, what limits do we have? What boundaries do we want to make? Are there parameters for the work that we can do? Who can we accommodate? Who can we not? And for a lot of our congregations, this conversation can be tough because we feel like we should be able to serve everybody. But I want to just kind of encourage you to know that within the mental health field, being specific, knowing your limit, knowing your boundary is extremely important. Just because based on your population, based on where you're serving, you will have different needs that you need to meet, and more attention to that particular population or issue is important. So not feeling the need to be an all service for all issues of mental health, but really kind of channeling where your heart lies, and at least to know we can do lunches, or we can do Saturday afternoons, or at least know how much you're willing to accommodate and be present before you start. We'll go to the next slide there. With that said, after thinking through these kind of initial questions, I wanted to lift up some types of ministries that we've seen throughout the disciples' churches that could possibly be a starting point for you. And so educational ministries, these are phenomenal and great ways to start. If you're not sure who you might serve or what comes out of it, you might do things of, what is mental health? You might do a campaign in your congregation, or a mental health Sunday in the month of May, or in October, mental health awareness, different Bible studies. But what is mental health? Something like, what is depression? Teaching elements of mental health, having Nominee come in. These are all great ways to educate and resource your congregations. Some topics that are always helpful is navigating therapy, how to get services. These are elements that you can do and host in terms of workshops or evening night lunch and learns in your congregation. Other types are support services. These can be anything from school rides to respite care for those who are taking care of people with mental health challenges. It could be having a buddy system or relational program for those with chronic illness, suffering, maybe the emotionality or holding what the illness might be. Support services can look like family support groups for those of family who have family members with mental health challenges, but thinking of, maybe we can't do mental health services, but we can support people. Mental health services, again, can be all types of services that really help the actual mental health challenge. So it could be anything from depression screenings. Some of our churches have counseling centers within the congregation. We may have a program that connects people to services. We'll talk a little about referral in a minute. But you would really set up to do, we want to do mental health services. With that said, pastoral care and support services. I can't stress how this is so important. I think as a church, sometimes we overlook our role in this, in really helping our congregation and our community members to make sense of mental health challenges within the faith context. What does the Bible say about anxiety? How can I hold grief and loss? Really some of that theological development and just pastoral care around support when someone is walking through that. Also, social and relational programming. And this is something that I've learned through our churches, that people who have and are suffering from mental health challenges also just enjoy social programming, relationship building, where their mental health challenges may be left up, but may not be mentioned at all. However, the actual event is mindful of what the special needs of that person might be. And so you might not have a bunch of radios and videos or different TVs going if somebody has autosensory issues. We don't necessarily lift up the fact that that person has it, but really setting up just kind of social elements for the people to get to know each other, either like them or engage in the congregation in a way that is friendly for who they are. Last but not least, the last two, advocacy and justice is a great way to get involved. We have some churches who really want to do organizing, do advocating and educating around issues of justice within the mental health field. These can be things like access to services, healthcare, access to child diagnosing practices. Whatever really stands true to what's happening in our community is a great way to get involved with justice and advocacy, and also the mental health element of it. And the last one is referral support. This is really important. We know that so many of our congregants come to our congregation for help, and our pastors are sometimes not able to do the kind of work they need to do. And so can a ministry really develop a network, can develop a list of therapists, a list of agencies in the community, a resource so that the congregational leaders and the pastor can go, hey, I can help you this way, and here are 15 other people who can help you. Let me refer you to these people. We've met with them, we've vetted them, they know who we are as a congregation. Essentially doing that middleman work of being that gateway or that relational support to getting our community members and our congregations to the supports they need. And so again, thinking through these questions and thinking through these types of ministries, we're excited to shift gears a bit and move into a space where we have three phenomenal ministries, three representatives from phenomenal ministries that have developed in such ways that we wanted to highlight today. And so we have a few questions for them, but beginning, I would love for them to first start by just introducing who they are, who their ministry is, and how it looks, who it serves, and how it functions. Start with Covenant Christian Church and Reverend Furr.
Hey, I'm Chris Furr. I'm senior minister at Covenant Christian in Cary. Our ministry is You Are Not Alone. That's what we call it. They're actually, You Are Not Alone is made up of two, what we call spiritual support groups. One is for those who are living with mental illness, and then the other group is for those who are family and friends of those who are living with mental illness. They meet at the same time in separate spaces, so they have that separate space. If there's a spouse, two spouses, one of which who's dealing with a mental health challenge and the other who's offering them support, they each have their own community where they can explore what's going on with them. And each group is facilitated by one ministry professional and one mental health professional. And the idea is that we're incorporating and tracing the threads of spirituality that might come up in conversation around mental health. And it meets twice a month in a communal space. It's open to all members of the community, and we launched in October of 2016, and so we've been in for about 18 months now.
Thank you. And we'll switch to the other slide for Loudon Avenue Christian Church.
Good afternoon. I am Linda Manns. I'm the community health nurse here at Loudon Avenue Christian Church. Thanks for the invitation. We have an active and thriving faith health ministry that we started back in the 80s, 29 years ago. And everybody thinks you have to have a lot of money or support to start something, but we started this ministry with a nurse, with just me. I just started it doing blood pressures. And over the years, it has grown to represent and serve people within the church as well as out of the church. One thing we strive to do is the wellness. We want to meet the physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual needs. And we do it through education, outreach, and counseling. And we want it to be affordable, accessible, and available. Many services are available in the community, but they're not affordable and available to individuals who need them, particularly individuals who are underinsured or not insured. We've been blessed to develop partnerships with individuals in the community, as well as the local hospitals, and they have helped us along the way. As far as health, we realized that there's more than just health. So what we did one year back in the early 90s was reach out to get a grant that we got from the Robert Wood Foundation, which gave us money to start our Faith in Action program. And it took care of our social advocacy, because individuals come to church. It's very difficult to hear the sermon when they're worried about where the next meal is coming from or how they're going to pay their rent. So the coordinator of that program, Minister Eva Yu, she's helped them with that. And we even have a diners club that meets here in the church twice a week, where we provide socialization and a hot meal for the individuals in the community. I'm giving you a snapshot of the community. It's just so much that we do. We have reached out and we affect the men. We do an annual prostate screening with them, where we have doctors from the local hospitals come into the health center that we have in our community, and they provide free screening for them. We have an annual breast awareness program where we call Sisters Night Out, and this will be our 8th year, where we provide services for the women in the community, letting them know that even though you don't have insurance, there are services that are in the community that you can access to get your mammogram, so you don't have to go without. So that's just a capsule, a small capsule of what we do. And I think we've been blessed, and we're moving into mental health. We do a little bit of it, but we're exploring it more and more. And we recently made application with Duke University, and we're working with them in a collaborative program, mental health in the church. So that has been exciting. We're reimagining what we can do in the church with mental health. I'll leave it right there, because I can go on and talk about our program, Angela, and I know we're restricted by time, but thank you for that.
Thank you. We'll come back with questions so you all can learn details about each one of these, but thank you for that. So we'll move along now to Tom with First Christian Church, Rise and Shine.
About 13 years ago, First Christian Church started a respite care ministry called Share. And we took care of kids on Friday nights who had special needs, and their brothers and sisters from 6 to 10. Families with kids with special needs started coming on Fridays, but then some of them started coming on Sundays too. And so we kind of tried to meet that need by providing a special needs Sunday school program where we would provide buddies or shepherds to go into the classrooms, Sunday school classrooms, with the kids with special needs. And so the program is called Rise. It kind of tells how we do this. Respect, include, support, and embrace. And so the first thing we try to do with our kids is include them in the services. We include them in Sunday school and give them what they need. Some can be included by themselves. Some, excuse me, some need an adult helper. Our youth groups, once they started coming to our church, they included them in youth groups. They help with worship, and also we send, when they go to camps, we send a helper with them so they can participate in camps with everybody else. So that's really kind of how the program Rise has developed, and we just really have learned to give kids what they need to be included and to be successful. And sometimes that means an adult, sometimes that means just checking on kids and helping their classes understand what their needs are as well. We are also trying to start another component of this called Shine. And a lot of our kids have gone through youth groups, and now they've become adults. And so they no longer have the support system at school. They no longer qualify for our youth program because they're too old. So we have about 4 to 5 kids that or young adults now that don't have a place. And so one of the things we want to try to start is called Shine, and it's supporting hearts in new environments. We want to make a place so that these young adults have a Sunday school, they can continue the fellowship that they were getting, and they can also, we can also take care of their spiritual needs through a young adult Sunday school. Social groups are also important so that they can continue to develop relationships with friends that were in their youth group. So we want to include young adults who are sensitive to persons with special needs in this group as kind of a mentor, and really just a continuation of what our youth groups did in a wonderful way to include kids with special needs, and we want to continue that as they become young adults.
Thank you. Thank you. It's always so neat to hear each of these ministries, because what we know in the field is that the church really stands lifelong with our who we are, walks with us through our life. And so all these different ways, so examples of how we as a church can actually be and fill in the gap where mental health professionals cannot. With that said, I'd love for us to move into a question and answer portion where each one of you just share a little bit about what motivated you and your congregation to begin or expand this type of ministry, move into mental health ministry. And then, so that's the first question, what motivated this? And also, what parameters or limitations did you consider when you were deciding on the focus or the reach or how it would actually look? So what was your motivation, and what were some of the parameters and limitations you considered? Let's kind of start first.
You want me?
Sure, it works.
Okay, got it. Well, I think for us it started, and I think this is one of the things that I would have people most take away from what I have to share, is that it started with a layperson. I think a lot of people tend to think that ministries come from the church office or from the ordained clergy, but my experience is most of the best ministries I know came from lay people. So we had a layperson here who shared their struggle with mental illness and shared that it was something that they had not shared with the church during that, and it really called us to think more deeply about breaking that stigma that lots of times folks have in the church. They'll share news about a cancer diagnosis or a diabetes or surgery or anything else. But we don't often hear someone say, my bipolar disorder has been especially difficult recently, or I just started a new medication and it's working really well. And so, it really was, let's see what we can do to at least break some of the stigma, give people a chance to find community and find one another, because we know the statistics bear it out that either one of us or someone we love will deal with a mental health challenge at some point in their life. So it just made sense for us to do that. And so we started having conversation around him, around his sharing, around his vision for these support groups. He had the vision for the groups. He had the name picked out. He had everything that he felt was needed. And so I came around him, and some others of our church leadership came around him and said, okay, how can we support you? How can we bring this to life? What do we need to know that we don't know? What is it that we don't know? We don't know. And so, we really just decided this was, we felt like the support groups were what we felt like was our area. I mean, all the things that you listed are things that, are ways to do mental health ministry. This was what we felt called to do and equipped to do. And we considered all kinds of things. How do we come up with best practices? How do we structure these groups in a way that we don't do harm to folks who might come into these groups? What else is happening in our community that we may not know about? Because so many times churches and social service agencies will operate in silos, and we're duplicating each other's work and we don't know it. So we really took time, really about 18 months or 2 years, really, to build relationships, ecumenical relationships across different churches, find out what else was happening in our area, educate ourselves, and do research in different models of what what was happening around the country. And we had really it was Alan Johnson from the UCC Mental Health Network, which I think we'll see some about later in the webinar, that we owe a lot of our best practices to for the work he's doing in Colorado. So so that was our roots. We're in just a layperson who had a vision, and just following that vision and being obedient to where we felt the Spirit leading us, and being intentional about incorporating it into the church, but also making that a vehicle that we could reach out to other people in our community and make ecumenical connections across all kinds of boundaries, where we could work together to make this happen for the whole community.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you.
This is Linda. What motivated us here at Loudon Avenue Christian Church was a lack of health care in the community, particularly for underserved and uninsured individuals. So we're very connected as a church in the community, and we found that people would come to us whenever they had any problems or concerns. So we kind of started out giving them like health education to let them know what they needed to do, where they need to do it, and connect them with resources in the community. We even did counseling. Individuals had blood pressure, diabetes, and stroke, knowing that those are high in the African-American population, and trying to prevent cardiovascular disease. Made referrals to various agencies in the community that can help them, because we recognize we were not a one-stop shop, and our limitations as what we could and could not do. We developed support groups to assist individuals in the community, and we advocated for healthy living for all the individuals that came in contact with us in the congregation as well as the community. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that are limitations, we recognized we were getting so busy that we had to pull back and recognize, okay, we can't do everything, and what can we do, and narrow our focus as what we wanted to outreach and help the individuals with. We did come up with some parameters focusing on the men's health, because we know as men, for some reason, men don't take care of themselves as well as women do. They try to keep it to themselves. So we started the monthly, yearly, annual prostate screening, and many of our men access that as their health care for the year. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to say, well, not glad, but I'm glad that the individuals that came were diagnosed with a high or abnormal PSA or DRE, and we were able to assist them to go on to get additional care so that their outcome would be better than not knowing what they had and not doing anything about it, as well as our women. The socialization that we do has focused on the individuals in the community who live alone, and they need some socialization, and that has helped them tremendously. Mm-hmm. As far as the mental health, we're recognizing that, and it's coming to light more, there's a lot of depression in the community. Mm-hmm. A lot of things that are going on, and people, which I'm thankful for, are now talking about it. They used to keep it to themselves, and it was a secret and didn't want others to know about it. But thank goodness that they know that they have a place to go. They won't be ridiculed if they say what's on their mind, and they can also get the help that they need. Mm-hmm. Education is a big part in what we do, because in order to move forward, we want them to know what is available and what they can do and what they cannot do. So that's just a snapshot of some of the things that we do. One thing I will say with the program, it's a program it's not a program, but it's something that anyone can do, and you can reach out and make relationships in the community, and you'll be surprised how many people are out there willing to help you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Angela.
No, thank you. We'll come back to like, how do we get sustaining force and resources in a minute, but I'd love to hear from you, Tom, as well. What was the motivating factors and maybe some parameters and limitations?
Well, one of the motivating factors to starting this was just becoming aware of some of the needs of family members. And so our church started SHARE and as the respite care ministry. And I just want to say that our church at the time lost about half of its membership and did not have a minister, and the congregation just really took on this ministry on their own, and are really to be congratulated for supporting it. Now, what happened though, once they started the respite care ministry and people started coming to church, we started hearing a lot of heartbreaking stories of families that had been uninvited from churches or told to leave different churches. And so most of our families who had kids with special needs, they didn't go to church because they didn't feel that they were included. Many of them had spiritual issues too, angry at God and for the situation. So they came with a lot of spiritual issues, and one of the motivations was we decided we want to make a place for these families in our church and include them. And so that's what kind of motivated a lot of our Sunday school classes and our adult buddies that helped out our kids. Now, when we started including kids in Sunday school, there were a lot of different levels of disability. Some were much more severe, and so we decided we needed in education world, it's called self-contained room, a Sunday school room for those kids that can't be successful in the regular classroom, Sunday school classroom. And so we developed some different levels of ways that we can serve families that have kids with special needs, depending on what kind of special needs that they have. And so that's been helpful because not everybody is the same, and not everybody can be included in a classroom. Now, one thing we did realize too is that for every child with special needs, there are usually parents and siblings that if the child's not with special needs is not included, those parents and those family members also suffer because they're not included. So we realize it's more than just one child. It's a whole family that we're dealing with, and a whole family that we're ministering to. But we did kind of have to see what kinds of disabilities that we were not prepared to deal with, and share. And we've had to deal with that. The more severe behavior issues, psychosis, neurosis, schizophrenia, we're just not prepared as a staff to handle kids that have those issues. And so we did have to put some limitations on share. Now, our church has not had to deal with that just yet, as far as more emotional disabilities and disabilities where kids act out and get physically aggressive. So we haven't had to deal with that, and I don't think we're prepared to handle kids with those limitations. But we do have to look at every child and every family separately and see how can we adequately provide effective care for the kids and to effective spiritual care for the kids and the families.
Definitely. Thank you for that. I actually might have even answered. We had a question that came in about, what specific needs do you serve? And so David, who sent that question in, if you still want to clarify on that, we'll come back to it at the end. But thank you for walking through your ministries. With that said, I'd like us to move just into sustaining the ministry. So these are beautiful ideas and they seem to have worked. So curious about who sustains the ministry, who runs it, or who essentially supports it and hosts it. And then is there any ways or wisdom you can give us around securing resources, whether it's financial or support from the community? What kind of resources that you've secured and how?
All right. Well, for us from the beginning, we knew that we have two groups that meet. There's two facilitators that are needed for each group. So that's 4 facilitators every time the group meets. I really wanted us to have at least twice that many facilitators on a team so that we didn't have, our facilitators weren't committing to running a group twice a month forever and ever. Particularly, lots of our folks who are facilitators are clergy who are either bivocational already or are working in a church setting, or they're mental health professionals who are seeing clients and are doing therapy themselves, have their own professional careers. So I felt that the sustainability of the ministry really we needed a lot of folks at the table. So that's where our organic relationships that we have with churches in our community came in to play. So I just went to my clergy colleagues and said, who in your church would be interested in helping with something like this? Who are the therapists? Who are the mental health professionals? Who are the people who may have training in ministry, who might see this as part of their ministry? And that's how we built our team. And we found folks actually who have been looking for a place like this to live out their ministry, their calling, and hadn't been able to find it or start it themselves. So that was an important thing. The second thing that was important was we wanted to be able to provide childcare, realizing that people with children, that may be a limitation to come into an evening meeting. And so my hope was that we could have a family of 4, and if it's husband and wife who need to be in the groups, that they could each be in the groups and not have to take turns or whatnot. So we went around to some of our Covenant put in some money. Some of our other churches in the area said, we don't have people to contribute. We do have this pot of money that we can contribute. So, and then we found our space that way as well. Our space is we meet on the campus of the Episcopal Church here in town, but it's not in the church building, which was important. They have a house, a single family home that's on their campus that they purchased adjacent to their property. And that's where we meet. And that's important, I think, because when it comes to inviting folks in, I think for so many people, they have trauma around church, and a church building isn't necessarily the most inviting space for them, or maybe they brought, they tried to find community in church for their mental health issue and were told that it was a spiritual deficiency or something they should pray away or any of those things that we know go on. So having kind of a neutral space that was still offered. So we have that is offered to us free of charge. We have an outlet for childcare. We have a great team of facilitators, and now I do the scheduling, and folks sort of volunteer for when they want to facilitate. But it's mostly a self-sustaining ministry at this point, and has hopefully will continue to be. We got what we need, and continuing to move along.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And just lifting up this idea of using your resources, right? So much was offered for free, which is awesome. So how do we have these kind of relationships to tap into those resources? Right. Tom or Linda, you want to lift up your sustaining your ministry, and how did you go about reserving resources?
One of the things that we quickly realized is that this was not a one-person team. And we started off by developing a healthcare cabinet in our church. And basically the cabinet is made up of volunteers who were concerned about health and who are committed to seeing that the healing ministry of the church is carried out. We meet here in the church sometimes monthly, every other month, and depending on what services are required, but at least minimum every other month. So that has worked well with us, and we have constantly over the years pulled in other individuals as they come from the church. And they're not all professionals. The majority of our health cabinet is lay individuals, and they have the ears of the community and the congregation where they can bring back information to us as far as what we may need to look at or move further with. As far as sustaining the ministry, I think we've been blessed with the various relationships that we've had in the community. I've been a community health nurse in the community for over 30-something years, so I was able to develop a lot of relationships with various agencies in the community. So as far as equipment and whatnot, I've been able to get equipment from various agencies in the community. For example, if a health center was upgrading a lot of their equipment, I quickly asked them, hey, can I have this blood pressure machine? Can I have this? And they would graciously donate it to us. We also had relationships with organizations that, if as far as funding, we were able to write grants, and we got funding for various grants. And I also want to put a plug in for our church. We have a wealth of resources within our own Christian church. I've gotten funding from various agencies in the church, as far as Disciple Wins Fellowship, Black Leadership Program, and the Black Leadership Endowment Fund. Those are a few of the entities that have helped us with programs that we have ongoing here in the church. And also, one big thing is our church thinks highly of the program that we have, that we're included in our church budget. So we're giving a stipend of money every year to do the ministry. So that has really sustained us through the many years that we have been in practice. And we also get in-kind service and whatnot. If it's not, financial, we've gotten in-kind service. So that's how we've been able to sustain ourselves over the 29 years that we've been in place.
Definitely. Great. And yes, I just want to, something's blocking your camera. We heard the information. If you adjust your camera, we'll see your face. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. All good. So Tom, did you want to go ahead and answer that question?
Yes. As far as the Rise and Shine ministry, there's Sunday school, our Sunday school special needs class, and then the young adult special needs. It's mainly, as far financially, it falls underneath the church and their youth ministry and children's ministry. And we've also gotten a grant from the NBA to kind of seed money to get these two ministries going. As far as volunteers go, the church has a children's learning center, and they have some people that work with kids with special needs in their learning center. And on Sundays, they're also available to work with persons with special needs, either in a special needs Sunday school class or to go with them to Sunday school or children's church and assist them that way. And really, I believe there's so many people, members of our congregation, who have known kids with special needs, and they don't have a fear about it. So they can also be volunteers as well. I know one thing we're going to do for the young adults is reach out to the community, and then also reach out to their parents, to people that are really concerned about their transition into adulthood, because there just aren't any services or many services in our part of Texas for persons that are becoming adults that have special needs. But there are people that are very concerned in the school district and other nonprofits that work with persons with special needs, and we will be reaching out to them as well to be involved. And hopefully, from the ground up, we can build a support system and a ministry for these for young adults with special needs.
Definitely. Thank you. And so with that, we'll shift gears and move a little bit into a question around expansion. And so a lot of these ministries, they, like you mentioned, attract people start coming to the church. But we've also found, for particularly two of our ministries, that it has moved into becoming a community ministry. And so if Linda or Tom, if you wouldn't mind lifting up just how it expanded, we can start with you, Tom, how this has expanded the relationship between this church ministry and Share Ministries, and a little bit about that.
Okay. Share was, as I said before, Share was started with by First Christian Church as a respite care ministry. And from 6 to 10, the families would drop their kids off, and we would take care of them and in specialized rooms and have activities for the kids. And so that's how it started. We started with about 12 families that were going to trust their kids with us. And so it grew. And one of the things that some members of the church forced us to do, and I'm glad they did, is to go by a 3-year implementation plan that they had set forth before we started. And that was very, very helpful, so that we could limit ourselves and not get overtaken by the big picture, but only expand when there's a need. And even in the three-year implementation plan, it listed some things that we had to meet before we could expand. For example, when we modeled this ministry after a respite care ministry in Dallas, and they provided nurses that care for kids with medical needs. That's what we wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do with the big vision that we can do that at our church. Fortunately, there were people that told us we don't need to start there. We need to start small, and then build up to that point. And so we were very lucky. We had somebody that made us do that, and so that was helpful. And we checked off, do we have funding? Do we have volunteers to support this? Do we have the space, the facility to support SHARE and adding programs? And so that was very helpful to us. And also when we decided to expand to another city, those same conditions had to be met before we could branch out. SHARE grew from the respite care. We learned about parent needs, and so developed some parent support programs and counseling support groups. We learned that families don't enjoy celebrations because they're not special needs friendly, and that families really kind of isolate themselves. So we started providing celebrations and family get-togethers, support groups where they could share their story with one another, much like some of the others today are talking about. We started, and so we did parent support programs, and then we found out that our siblings were also had some needs, a lot of needs, and developed, copied a program called Sib Shop. And so we provided places for opportunities for siblings to come and talk about their concerns and develop friendships with other siblings that knew what that's like. We developed some other programs for the siblings, the Sib Camp and Sibling Celebration, and just wanted siblings to have that support, and so that they can grow up with a support system of other people that understand what that's like. And so SHARE ended up kind of developing into support programs, to have support programs for the family members from a respite care ministry to really a ministry to families that care for the kids. And so that's kind of how SHARE has developed. I think you wanted me to mention the relationship with the church. Financially, the church was not going to be able to support SHARE with its growth. And so we made a difficult decision 4 years into SHARE to become a nonprofit, 501c3. And that was a really hard decision because the church had meant so much to us, but we did that for financial reasons, and we can get support from United Way if we're a nonprofit. We can write grants to foundations. And so we went ahead and voted to become a nonprofit, and we still use the church's facility. So we still have that relationship. And when people do come to the church who have kids with special needs, that's communicating something to them that, here is a church that supports you, and God's supporting you too. And so that just having our programs at the church means a lot to our families, and many of our families consider it their church, even though they never set foot in a worship service. And so that's kind of how SHARE has developed. And again, we are one of a number of nonprofits in Midland, and so we don't operate as a ministry of First Christian Church, and that was hard to get used to because we're two separate entities now, but we still have a supportive relationship with the church, First Christian Church, and other churches. But basically right now we're a nonprofit and are kind of living in the nonprofit world with the requirements that are our laws with nonprofits.
Definitely. Thank you for that. And Linda, I know if you were able to speak to the New Horizons Healthcare Center.
I am. Our church is located in a medically underserved area. And unfortunately, a population about 40,000, there was no primary care services within our community. We recognized that individuals had to leave the community to get the services that they required. So our pastor at that time, Reverend Bill Lee, brought together a grassroots effort with leaders in the community. And we met in the church basement and strategized as to how we could meet the needs of the population. We had local health centers, hospitals that were involved. We met over a year or two, and as things went on, things weren't going the way they wanted to, and kind of dropped us a little bit. But Pastor and his vision, we stuck with it, and we caught the eye of the director of the Virginia Primary Health Care Center for Virginia, and he said, "You believe in this?" And he said, "I absolutely do. It's a faith initiative." So they provided a grant writer for us, and that grant writer came in, wrote the grant, and unbeknownst to most people who did not think we would get the grant, we were awarded a grant. We started this federally qualified health center in the basement of our church because we had no building at that time. We moved out of the church into land that was owned by a local entity that we were able to purchase and put a 32,000 square foot modular on. We quickly outgrew that, and one of the local hospitals gave us rental space that we can continue with the clinic. 5 years later, with Affordable Care Act, we were able to write a grant and was awarded $10.6 million to build the building that you see in the picture. So this building is located in the Northwest community, and it provides an array of services. It's a growing clinic. It includes pediatric, family medicine. It has an on-site pharmacy with medication assistance program. We provide behavioral health there and a sliding scale, which I think is unique for this area. What it means is that if you don't have insurance, they will see you based on your income, where the copay may start at a minimum of $20, $30, and that allows them to see the doctor, have any tests that they need, and they also get their medication. So we're real proud of this federally qualified health center that we now have in the community, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. That building opened 3 years ago, and we have already outgrown it. We have a couple of satellite clinics located in the community. And one thing this health center brought to the area was a dental program. That was something that was sorely lacking for individuals that did not have insurance. So now we're able to provide dental in the community. So this was all by the graces of God and our faith commitment to provide services in the community, and individuals working with us to make it happen.
Thank you for that. I think what's so inspiring about all three of these ministries is showing kind of the heart space of here's what we were initially thinking and how they've changed and grown, but even morphed into health centers. And so I appreciate you lifting up that history. For those of you watching, this started in the church basement. You know, it started with one person, Linda. All of our ministries started out of just, hey, how can we serve? I'll tell you, as a mental health professional, there's so much gap between what professionals can do and the supports that people really need. And so as a church is thinking about how do we find ourselves in the world today, lifting up things like mental health and health in general is definitely something that I know will grow over time. So thank you for sharing, all of you, just how your ministries have expanded, how they started, what motivated you. And thinking about what you've shared today, what are just some wisdoms that you would offer people who are just in the beginning stages, don't even know where to start with mental health, or they have an idea, but really wanting to develop their ministry? Is there maybe startup wisdom, maybe sustaining wisdom once it's going? What might they run into? And just overall, just general wisdom you would share with somebody.
Well, I think I would say, particularly to those clergy who are there. I mean, generally when you're preaching or speaking in front of your congregation, when you have somebody's attention and when you don't.
Sure.
And the times that I have made mental health issues a centerpiece of a sermon based on what the scripture tells us, I've had more attention and more engagement in those instances than I have in lots of others. And that opens the door. It opens the door for people to come and share with you something that they might not have shared or relay. And that's how you begin to see what the needs are in your own congregation. It's maybe the starting point for somebody who has a vision for something that wasn't there when they needed it. And something that they think the church can do. And I mean, all the things like the 3 ministries that are listed that have been featured here and all the things that Angela listed at the beginning of the webinar is very broad. So, you know, what your thing is may not be all encompassing, but if it's serving a particular population in a particular way, then all of those things are necessary for what is a very neglected but very big issue in our culture. And so, you know, starting somewhere with whatever your church feels called or gifted to do, you're not going to do everything, but you can do something. And the last thing I'll say is just to call, like we said earlier, call on those relationships, because hopefully you're already engaged in ecumenical relationships in your community or partnerships with other congregations. But if you're not, this is a great way to reach out and say, hey, we want to do this, but we want to know what's going on. What's your church doing? How can we work together? It's good common ground, I guess, to establish relationships if they don't exist already in your community.
Definitely. Thank you.
Some of the wisdom that I can give is, number one, if you don't have a health ministry, I would get the support of your gatekeeper, meaning your pastor and the leaders in the church. Hopefully they're on board. And if they're on board, they're speaking it from the pulpit and the congregation is hearing it, that these are the things that we need to do. I would also recommend a healthcare cabinet put together with members of the church to work together to bring about a ministry in the church dealing with health that will attack emotional, spiritual, and all the social and mental issues that may exist. One way to get started is to do a health assessment and see, as Angela, what are people thinking in your church? What do they know? And then when you get that, narrow it down and focus on what are our top 3 concerns that we want to address. As was said before, relationships are very helpful in the church because, number one, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of people out there doing some of the things that you may strive to do. Can I join in, or can I tweak it, or can I use what's already out there? But there are a lot of stuff in the community. It's just a matter of getting to know them and know the people in the community and develop those relationships with them, because they're willing to help and it helps them with the business that they're doing. So looking at the overall and health of the community and the congregation, that will be a very good starting point for you.
Definitely. Tom.
And I would just add, I think it's really important to start small. Sometimes when you get a vision for something, you're thinking in the big picture. And like Linda started in the basement of a church, and she didn't have this beautiful building overnight. It took work. And so I think starting small is really important. Also, I just think it's important to educate the church too, and do some relationship building and some publicity there about your ideas so that they can get their minds around it too. And then the other thing that I would suggest is to make sure that you think about some of the specifics of how this is going to happen. Just for example, I had the great idea of this respite care ministry and talked with others and presented it to our board, and they voted it down at first. A second time about 4 or 5 months later, I presented it in a way that showed them that we had thought about volunteers, we thought about funding, we thought about the facility usage. We had thought through all of this, and it was approved when I could demonstrate that we had done that. And even as a nonprofit, funders and people that give grants want to see that as well. So it's, when you start something new, it's kind of scary to many people. While it might not be scary to you. And I think others just need to be helped to get a handle on it and to have confidence in what your vision is and how you could lead them to realize that vision.
Definitely, definitely. I thank you for all this wisdom. We are getting close to the end, and so we're going to move into questions. But I did want to mention the UCC Mental Health Network. This is a phenomenal ministry from our UCC partners who really have spent the last 10 years thinking about this very question. How do you build a mental health ministry in your church? I have the pleasure of serving on the board, and there is a Chicago area conference coming up for those of you in the Chicago area. May 4th. If you go to this website, you can find more information on registering. But I encourage all of us to go to this website. There is a Wise Congregations is a model in which those of us interested in building a mental health ministry can look at. There are 10 questions that you ask yourself, or almost 10 steps to becoming a wise congregation. And the website has more information about that. I know that Chris had mentioned Reverend Alan, who is a part of starting this ministry. So I encourage you to go to this blog. We're going to go to questions, and if we have some time, we'll go back to those 10 steps at the end today.
Awesome. Well, first I want to thank all of you, Chris, Linda, Tom, and Angela, for the presentation part, for the conversation, which I think was really, really rich. And there were some questions that came in, which I think show the interest and highlight what's kind of percolating in the life of the church. And so the first question was from David, who I think we answered a little bit, but just to give it a little bit more direct. This question is to you, Tom. Are your support groups for kids with special needs limited to physical needs, or do they include learning disabilities, autism, etc.?
We limit the people that apply for our program. We want to serve those that have the most severe special needs. And so those include kids that have autism, muscular dystrophy, Down syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome, cerebral palsy, and those are the most common disabilities. When we started, we decided not to serve kids with ADD or speech or dyslexia because those were disabilities, although they can be debilitating, they're disabilities that are easy to find childcare for our parents. The others, our parents can't find anybody to take care of their kids. And so these are parents that haven't been on a date in 4 or 5 years. And so we did decide to limit, we decided not to serve kids with minor disabilities.
Thank you for that. I think what that points to is the importance that was raised in the very beginning about recognizing the resources that are around you or the lack thereof, and filling out that gap, aligning that gap with the passion of who's the vision for the ministry and those who might be serving and served. So that's a beautiful way to think about that. The second question, and we only have 2 more. The second one's from Joanne. She would like to know if there are any of our panelists who are available for consultations for churches trying to get started. So that's for any of you, maybe by a nod or a yes, or if you have something to expand around that. But would you be willing to be present with a local congregation that's trying to get started?
Oh, definitely.
We
Sure.
do have.
Yes.
We do have contact information in the slides, at the end of the slides, to reach out.
Awesome. That's right. So any of you can get connected to these folks. They're awesome folks who are doing some pretty amazing work. And then last but not least, a question from Owen. Have any of these projects considered implementing a social enterprise in order to create a diversified income system? So how are these ministries being funded, or have you thought about diversifying the ways that you're funded? Linda, I think you talked a little bit about that, and Tom as well, in terms of how you all have moved out of the congregational setting per se, to become separate 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and then what that's allowed you to do. But if any of the three of you want to expand a little bit on that, I welcome that.
Okay, well, I'll jump in. Share has, since becoming a nonprofit, that qualifies us to write grants. So grants from foundation is one stream of income that we have. We have a grant through the Texas Department of State Health Services, and that's another stream of income that we have. And then finally, as most nonprofits I've discovered have fundraisers. So we have two fundraisers and a year, and that provides about another third of our funding. And we don't charge anything for any of our programs. Simply, we're just able to do that because of the philanthropy in this area that supports nonprofits. We've considered it in the past, and we still may do something on a sliding scale in the future. But right now, there's no charge for our programs.
Our faith health ministry here at Loudon Avenue is still within the church, and I get support. Like I said, I'm in the church budget. I write grants in relationship with various entities in the community versus in-kind service as well as grants. New Horizon Health Care Center is a federally qualified health center that I guess we get attached to it because it started in our church, but they are separate from the church, and they're supported by grants from the government as well as they do fundraisers. They also write grants, and they also charge the patients for the services that they receive. So that sustains them in order to operate as an entity.
Thank you to both of you. As we close, I know there are some practical tips for how you might get started. So I know some of you want to talk a little bit more to our panelists, and we hope that you do reach out to them. But as you're getting started, Angela, you want to talk a little bit about some things, last minute things or first things that people need to consider.
Well, this is actually the 10 steps from the WISE, the UCC Mental Health Network. And so when you go to that website, you'll see this, but you can also partner with a team that can do this workshop in your congregation. If you go to the Chicagoland conference, we'll also be talking about this. But quickly, the 10 steps that we think through is we make a commitment as a congregation to become a WISE congregation, educating yourself, get buy-in from your clergy and board of directors, form a task force or a ministry team within the congregation, decide with your team what you want to offer and accomplish. We'll go to the next slide there for 6. Which would be defining strategies for keeping the congregation, board, and clergy involved. How do we keep buy-in? Making an inventory of available resources, like we talked about earlier, joining with other organizations, communicating, and being prepared to nurture your ministry over time. And so I want to highly encourage you again to visit the UCC Mental Health Network website. And also for the MBA website, we're going to be posting this slide and webinar to our MBAcares.org. As well as there are other, like we talked about, theological conversations, breaking stigma within the church around the culture. We have some other webinars that might be helpful when you're in those early stages of how do you just breach the subject in your congregation. So using both websites once you're ready and in the beginning is super helpful if you're doing this journey. With that said, we have our contact information here.
Excellent. Well, today that ends our webinar. I want to thank you all for hanging in there with us, and thank you for your time. We want you to consider the many ways that you and your congregation might get involved or further your ministries in becoming welcoming congregations for those who have experienced or are currently experiencing mental illness. Today's webinar recording will be available on the MBA website soon for your convenience, and we ask that you would share this resource with others. We also want to let you know that next month we'll have a webinar from the MBA Prison and Jail Ministries on how to start a prison congregation. That will be held on Thursday, May 17th around the same time, 12 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Eastern. And so we invite you to be with us then. Look for more information and registration on the MBA website. We would love for you to get connected to the MBA Mental Health Initiative. You're welcome to email Angela at Whitenhill@mbacares.org, or to visit the website at mbacares.org/mental-health. Remember to like us on MBA, like MBA on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and visit our webpage for more information related to Disciples Health and Social Service Ministries, and look out for more information on our upcoming events. We thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.